On a quiet street in Frederick, Colorado, a young father stood outside his
I don't know where my kids are. I don't know where Shanann is.
It's return of his
it's not
wife
something I could ever fathom would happen in my lifetime.
Killing
and
all three of them. This is the story of how a seemingly ordinary family fell apart in a matter of weeks, and how investigators pieced together the truth behind one of the most shocking cases in recent American history. Chris Watts and Shanann Watts met online in the early 2000s and married in 2012. On the surface, their life looked like a success story. Chris worked as an operator for Anadarko Petroleum. Shanann built a career as a seller and promoter for a wellness company, often posting about her family on social media. They had 2 daughters together, Bella and Celeste, and by the summer of 2018, Shanann was pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy they planned to name Nico. To followers online, they appeared to be a loving, photogenic family. But behind that public image, the marriage was under strain. Financial records later reviewed by investigators and reported publicly showed the family was dealing with significant debt, including unpaid bills and a looming bankruptcy filing. At the same time, Chris had begun an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger, whom he had started seeing in June of 2018. According to statements Kessinger later gave to police, she was unaware Chris was still married and living with his wife and children. As August approached, the pressure in Chris Watts' life was building on multiple fronts at once. If you're finding this timeline helpful in understanding how investigators later reconstructed events, consider subscribing so you don't miss how this case unfolded. In early August, Shanann and the girls traveled to North Carolina to visit family. Chris stayed behind in Colorado. Text messages and phone records later reviewed by investigators showed communication between Chris and Shanann continued, but tension was present. Shanann returned home on a red-eye flight in the very early hours of August 13th, 2018. A friend, Nicole Atkinson, had picked her up from the airport and dropped her off at the family home around 1:48 in the morning. That was the last confirmed sighting of Shanann Watts by anyone outside her immediate household. Later that day, when Shanann failed to show up for a doctor's appointment and wasn't answering calls or texts, Nicole Atkinson grew concerned. She went to the Watts home to check on her friend. Chris Watts answered the door. According to the accounts Atkinson later gave to police, his behavior struck her as strange. Shanann's car was still in the garage. The girls were nowhere to be seen. Unable to shake her unease, Atkinson called the Frederick Police Department and requested a welfare check. When officers arrived, they interviewed Chris Watts on his front lawn, an exchange partially captured on police body cam footage that would later be released publicly and widely viewed.
Chris Watts, WATTS.
What's going on right now around your house?
Right now, it's got K9 units, the sheriff's department. Everybody's like they're doing their best right now to figure out like if they can get a scent, see where they went. If they went on foot, they went in a car, or they went somewhere.
Of the situation.
And right now, it's just like they've been on point. They're going through the house trying to get a scent. And hopefully, they can pick something up to where it's going to lead to something.
Along with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation and the FBI, began building.
She came home from the airport 2 a.m. and I left around 5:15. She was still here.
Shown in court.
And like about 12:10 in that afternoon, her friend Nicole showed up at the door. Like I had texted Shanann a few times that day, called her, say, but she never got back to me, but she wasn't getting back to any of her people.
But it became a key piece of evidence in establishing his movements that morning. Stick with me, because the next 48 hours of this investigation reveal exactly how small inconsistencies can unravel an entire story. Chris Watts gave several media interviews in the days following the disappearance, appearing distressed and asking for his family's safe return. These interviews were widely broadcast and are part of the public record. At the same time, investigators were conducting formal interviews with him at the police station. During one of these interviews, Watts was asked to take a polygraph examination. According to court documents and reporting on the case, he agreed to participate, though the specific results of that polygraph were not the sole basis for his arrest. Investigators have said publicly that inconsistencies in his statements, combined with the surveillance footage and other evidence gathered during the investigation, led them to view him as a person of interest rather than simply a worried husband. During subsequent interviews, according to the arrest affidavit later made public, Chris Watts eventually altered his account of what happened, ultimately telling investigators that after seeing Shanann strangle their daughter Celeste, he killed Shanann in a rage. He then led investigators to the Cervi 319 oil and gas site, operated by Anadarko Petroleum, where he worked. There, authorities recovered Shanann's body, which had been buried in a shallow grave. The bodies of Bella and Celeste were found submerged inside separate crude oil tanks at the same site. Out of respect for the victims and their family, this script will not go into further detail about the condition in which they were found. Nicole Kessinger, the co-worker Chris had been seeing, cooperated fully with investigators once she learned the truth about his marriage and the circumstances of the case. She was never charged with any crime, and prosecutors stated she had no knowledge of or involvement in what happened. If you appreciate true crime coverage that separates verified fact from speculation, a like on this video genuinely helps this kind of research reach more people. Chris Watts was arrested on August 15th, 2018, and initially charged with multiple counts, including first-degree murder. As the case moved forward, prosecutors and the defense reached a plea agreement. In November 2018, Watts pleaded guilty to 9 charges, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, in exchange for prosecutors agreeing not to pursue the death penalty. During his sentencing hearing, prosecutors presented a different account than his earlier claim of a sudden rage killing. Based on the evidence gathered, including his own later statements, prosecutors described a more premeditated sequence of events, though Watts himself has given differing accounts of his motive and state of mind at various points. Because of these inconsistencies in his own retelling, exactly what happened inside that house and why remains something only he can fully answer, and even his own statements have not been entirely consistent. Chris Watts was sentenced in November 2018 to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, to be served consecutively, along with additional time for related charges. He was later transferred from a Colorado prison to a facility in Wisconsin, a move that was reported to be related to safety concerns following threats against him from other inmates. Before you go, if you want to understand how investigators cross-reference digital evidence, surveillance footage, and witness statements in cases like this, subscribing helps support more research like this. The case drew intense public attention, in part because of how ordinary the family had appeared from the outside, and in part because of the scale of the loss. Shanann's mother, Sandra Rzucek, along with other family members, has spoken publicly in interviews and documentaries about the devastating impact of losing Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, as well as the unborn child, Nico. Their grief remains a central part of how this case is remembered, not the actions of the man responsible. Looking back at how this case was solved, it's a reminder that investigations often hinge on small, verifiable details, inconsistent statements, timestamps, surveillance footage, and financial records, rather than a single dramatic breakthrough. It's also a sobering reminder that outward appearances of a happy family do not always reflect what is happening privately. Investigators and mental health professionals have cautioned against drawing broad conclusions about warning signs from any single case, since every situation is different. What can be said with confidence is that careful, methodical police work, not speculation, is what ultimately established the truth in this case. If you found this breakdown thorough and respectful of the people at the center of this story, consider subscribing for more carefully researched true crime cases. And if you'd like to share your thoughts, please do so respectfully in the comments, particularly if you want to discuss the investigative techniques used here rather than speculation about the people involved. Thank you for watching.